Neural Networks and Education, the Art of Learning. My name is Lucy Yu. I will be the narrator of this video presentation. The purpose of this video is to summarize the content of a book written by Francis T. S. Yu, Evan Pugh University Professor of Electrical Engineering at the Pennsylvania State University. When Professor Yu lectured around the world, those who knew him wanted to know how could he progress from a bad student in high school to become a well-known scientist in his field. Many students often asked, what was the secret of your learning method? To answer their questions, Professor Yu pulled his learning, teaching, and research experience over decades to write the book Neural Networks and Education, the Art of Learning. This book is written more like a slide presentation than a conventional book. It is designed to be as simple as possible so that everyone can read it. To cope with the rapid advances of science and technology, we have to educate our students more innovatively rather than continue to use the old-fashioned traditional way. This book has 15 sections. It begins with common sense in education and moves on to the art of learning. Common sense tells us that if we knew the basic constraints and abilities of our neural network, then more efficient learning and educational methods can be devised. A couple of fundamental questions. Are we educating our students efficiently? The answer to this question is apparently no. How can we improve it? It can be improved with innovative educational methods, as has been briefly discussed in this book. Let's start on the first section of the book, Common Sense on Education or Training. In this slide, here you see a picture of a water buffalo and the Arabian horse, with the buffalo on the left and the Arabian horse on the right. This slide shows the inherent ability and limitation of Asian water buffalo and Arabian horse. For example, on the left, the Asian water buffalo is excellent to work in muddy rice field, and they are good swimmers, whereas Arabian horse is excellent for riding and racing. Therefore, it would be a mistake to train or to educate an Asian water buffalo for racing, and it would be a serious mistake to train an Arabian horse to work in a muddy rice field. If we understand the inherent property of the human brain, that is the biological neural network, then an innovative educational program for a specific subject may be found. Let's take a look at the biological and artificial neural networks. On the right-hand side, we see the biological neural network. On the left-hand side, we see artificial neural network. A human brain consists of billions and billions of neurons that are massively interconnected by synapses. Techniques of artificial neural networks are basically drawn from cognitive psychology and from biological models. Thus, the purpose of neural network research is to simulate the structure of a network of massively interconnected biological neurons in which information is processed in a parallel as well as associative manner. There are, however, some fundamental differences between digital computer and artificial neural network. In artificial neural network, every neuron performs simple logical operations, whereas with digital computers, data processing relies on central processing unit. Artificial neural networks are capable of learning, improving their performances, adapting to different environments, and coping with disruptions, whereas digital computers are programmed with rigid rules which must be manually reprogrammed for better solutions. For example, neural networks can process inexact, ambiguous, fuzzy data that do not exactly match the stored information, whereas electronic computers cannot adjust the specific definitions and rules. They are programmed to accommodate the new, inexact, degraded, or contradictory input. Next, let's look at major differences between neural networks and computers. Slide 5 shows us that a digital computer has one or more central processing units. The neural network has many processing elements. The digital computer uses sequential processing. This neural network uses parallel processing. Digital computer uses programs. Neural network uses learning rules. Digital computer is good for computation, whereas the neural network is good for pattern recognition. For example, in terms of calculations such as addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, a computer can compute more efficiently and more accurately than a human brain. However, for cognitive type of operations, such as understanding a language, pattern recognition, or thinking, a 3-year-old child can perform better than that of a supercomputer. It is my belief that the survival instinct of humans on planet Earth is very much dependent upon our physical ability to run, to climb a tree, to reproduce, as well as the cognitive ability to hunt, to seek shelter, to use tools. It took our brain millions of years to evolve from primitive to its current form. The parts we use often expanded. The parts we did not use often shrank or even died off. We can imagine that if the survival condition of some living species on a distant planet is more dependent on calculation, then their brains might behave more like computers. Let's go on to memory-based neural networks. Memory-based on process of association. We know that the human brain, which stores and retrieves information, is aided by process of association. A couple of examples. First, remembering Chinese or Japanese persons' names are usually based on the association of meaning rather than pronunciation. Secondly, memorizing telephone numbers is generally based on sequencing, symmetric properties, partitions, rhythm, and others. For example, the Japanese name Kazu Nakasawa. The meaning of gentleman's name is swimming in the middle of a river. Let me tell you a story how I remember Professor Kazu Nakasawa's name. The first time we met, he gave me his name verbally. Since I neither speak nor read Japanese, I could not remember it. Subsequently, on many occasions at various international conferences, this Japanese scientist always greeted me by name. It was embarrassing for me to constantly ask for his name. Finally, he gave me a business card with Japanese characters, which are incidentally identical to Chinese characters. Then suddenly I saw in those characters that his name means a gentleman is swimming in the middle of a river. This association made it easier for me to remember his name. I still remember his name today, even though I have not seen him for many years. In fact, associative memory is one of the best techniques for storage and retrieval of information in the neural net. The reasons are First, they are capable of retrieving information from partial or erroneous input. And secondly, the robustness in noise and distortion. And third, the ability to select closeness or similarity of information. Let's look at one more story. Another interesting example of memory aid. A few months ago, I saw a segment on the CBS program 60 Minutes about a young boy in the United States who can remember over 100 digits of pi. Immediately, I felt that there must be a method that the young boy used to remember the sequence of numbers. I wondered, was he associating the sequence of digits with music or a picture, or if he permuted the sequence into arrays of numbers? As we know that every problem has multiple solutions, one of the solutions we discovered is as follows. Look at the sequence of numbers in pi. If I try to actually remember the sequence of numbers as it is, it would be a daunting task. However, if I permutated the sequence of numbers into a list of 10-digit arrays of numbers as follows, and here you see the 10-digit arrays. Now, if we treated these arrays of numbers as 11 telephone numbers, then they are not very difficult to remember. Thus, we see that by simply permuting a long sequence of numbers into arrays of numbers, it makes it easier for us to remember a long sequence, whereas 100 digit of pi seems impossible to remember. This is just a simple example to show that by using smart association process, one can increase the neural information storage capacity. This illustration also shows the inherent capability of the human brain, which can process two-dimensional information formats more efficiently than a one-dimensional representation. I will discuss this subject later. Let's take a look at artificial neuron operation. In general, a neural network of n neurons has n by n interconnections. The transfer function of a neuron operation can be described by a nonlinear operation, making the output of a neuron operation in a 0 or 1 binary state, or a sigmoid function that gives rise to an analog value. In this slide, we see that the memory matrix may be represented by a two-dimensional format, which is very suitable for panoptical space interconnection. Professor Yu and his students have developed a 64 neuron networks as shown in the next slide. This slide shows a schematic diagram of the Penn State optical neuron network developed by Professor Yu and his students. The bottom is the experimental setup. Some people ask why optical neuron network and not others. Because optics has the advantage of massive interconnectivity, high density, parallel processing capability, and others. However, optics is still not very flexible to operate. Therefore, a hybrid optical neuron network is more suitable. Although artificial neural network operation is still far away from the reality of biological neural network, it is a step closer. In fact, the 2D representation of the memory matrix is very suitable to facilitate our presentation of the adaptability, storage, fast and slow learners demonstrations, as we shall discuss in the subsequent sections. This section talks about associative memory neural network. Slide 13 shows that with AEWX as training set, we presented a partial image of A to the optical neural network. In one iteration, a retrieved image of A is obtained. We see that the optical neural network behaves indeed like a biological neural network. Let's talk about intra and inter-pattern association. Intra-pattern association neural network means that the neural network ignores the association between the stored exemplars, while inter-pattern association neural network deals with association among stored patterns. In slide 14, we see that twin brothers George and Tony look alike, except Tony has hair and George is the one with a mustache. It's apparent that hair and mustache are special features that differentiate them. All the other facial features are common features. By considering the special and common features, an inter-pattern association neural network can be constructed for Tony and George. Now let me show in slide 15 the performances between inter-pattern association and intra-pattern association neural networks. In slide 15, we see that the stored patterns in which we use were P, B, R as the training set. Notice that the selection of similarities among the letters was intentional. This is purposefully done to see the discrimination ability among these stored letters. In view of the corresponding memory matrices for inter-pattern and intra-pattern neural networks as shown in the middle column of slide 15, we see that the inter-pattern memory matrix offers more storage space for additional patterns, while intra-pattern memory matrix is almost full for the BPR set stored exemplars. We have further extended the training set to all 26 letters from A to Z for the 64 neuron optical network. We have seen by using inter-pattern association algorithm, the neuron network can actually retrieve all the 26 capital letters without error under no input noise conditions, whereas intra-pattern neural network becomes unstable beyond 5 letters. We have shown that the artificial neural network behaves as biological neural network. Once again, we see that if we use a smarter association memory, we would be able to store more patterns or remember more. In fact, those who use smart associative memory find it more fun to learn. Note that human brain is not designed to remember a huge quantity of information. Otherwise, we would not have developed those storage gadgets such as computers, compact discs, flash memory sticks, and so on and so forth to help us. Next, we will look at supervised and unsupervised learning neural networks. Supervised learning, that is, teacher organizes the information and then teaches the students. In other words, an artificial neural network has to be taught when to learn and when to process the information. Unsupervised learning is when students learn by themselves based on some learning rules and past experiences. In other words, after a series of trials, the artificial neural network is capable of adapting and categorizing the unknown objects. Note that the intra-pattern and inter-pattern association learning are examples of supervised learning neural network. Now let us show an example of unsupervised learning neural network in slide 18. This example, we use the cohonent feature map algorithm, that is the learning rule, for our experiment. Again, we use the 64 neuron optical network for our test. The memory matrix on the left-hand side shows the original memory matrix, which has a 50% error rate, represented as no memory. Then, by repeatedly presenting a sequence of training set which contains a tree, a dog, a car, and an airplane to the optical neural network shown in the upper part of slide 18. The corresponding memory matrix eventually converges to a feature map, as can be seen on the right side of this slide. This indicates that the neural network eventually learned the patterns. Note that this result is actually very similar to real-life experience. As we repeatedly encounter a new pattern or object, then we will learn to recognize, that is, learn the pattern. This result also shows the adaptability of neural network. By following some learning rule, it is capable of categorizing the unknown patterns. In our case, we use the cohonent feature map. Note that it is not our intention to discuss in detail the cohonent feature map in this presentation. For those readers who's interested in this subject, we refer his work in the reference at the end of this book, which is reference 2. Now let's take a look at the fast and slow learners. To show the adaptability of an artificial neural network, we give an example as applied to a fast learner and a slow learner in slide 19. Again, we use cohonent algorithm for the learning rule. The training set we used this time was IJXT. In view of the memory matrix shown in the slide, we see the fast learner has the advantage of speed, that is, fewer numbers of iterations, but the feature map, i.e. memory matrix, is less organized as compared with the slow learner. Note that this result is actually very similar to real-life experience. Although the slow learner has the disadvantage of speed, he or she remembers better and is usually more organized, as can be seen in this set of memory matrix on the right-hand side. Let's look at cognitive learning, the art of understanding. One of the inherent processing capability of a human brain, that is the biological neural network, is the ability to learn, the art of learning. Cognitive learning is the art of understanding how one learns. For example, learn how things work is more important and is essential than just remembering how they operate. It is important to know the axiom of multiplication instead of just memorizing the multiplication table. Note that the optical neural network we developed has not been tested yet for cognitive learning, so we will not be able to show with illustrations how the memory matrices behave under the art of learning. Nonetheless, we shall show examples as related to the art of cognitive learning in subsequent slides. Let us now look at slide 21, which explains what is cognitive learning, or the art of understanding. Cognitive learning, the art of understanding the basic concepts and the physical significance as we are learning is known as cognitive learning. For example, we should teach them the axiom, that is, understanding the concept of multiplication. Physical significance of Maxwell's equations, as you see on this slide, The physical significance of the equations are respectively derived from Gauss' law, Faraday's law, and Ampere's law. Note that these equations are generally very accurate, but by no means exact. Another example is the art of learning calculus. Calculus can be seen as an extension from geometry, using a new set of symbolic representations, using the rectangular shape to represent the areas. The symbolic representation or transformation, or even substitution as you want to call it, make the calculus more efficient to apply. Note that the symbolic representation actually puts calculus in a higher level of mathematical abstraction. We further stress that the usage of symbolic representation in mathematics is very crucial. It is believed that the simplicity of the symbolic representation in mathematics has tremendous effect on the development of mathematics itself and its application to science. Learning the simplicity, the art of learning the basics. As we all know that complexity is the ensemble of simplicities. An automobile is assembled by hundreds of simple mechanical and electrical parts. A human body is actually a very large-scale biological integrated system. It is a daunting task to learn the detailed construction of either system, unless you are actually working on it. The fact is that our brain is not designed to remember or equipped to learn very complicated systems or complicated equations. This slide summarizes complexity and simplicity learning. Complex learning is actually an ensemble of many learning simplicities as a very large-scale integration system, which we presented as an equation from the following. Complex learning is the summation of simplicity learning. It is also the integration of simplicity learning. That is, complicated system synthesis equals assembling various basic operating subsystems. Complicated roadmap equation is the summation of various simple equations. Although human has millions and millions, billions that is, of neurons, and they are massively interconnected with billions and billions synapses, our brain is not purposely designed to remember billions and billions bits of information. It is, in fact, a serious mistake to ask our neural network to overburden its capability. In our experience, it is more efficient to ask our neural network to understand the simple components and put them together. Later, we can build a more complex integrated system. It is evident from our experience that it is much easier to remember and to understand the basic concepts and physical significances than the complexity which can be forgotten easily. In this context, for certain subjects such as learning math, science, cognitive learning is more efficient and effective. Thus, the art of understanding the basics and fundamentals is far more important than memorizing complex equations. As we have mentioned earlier, complex learning is actually the integration of learning many simplicity of knowledge. Simplicity of learning is also associated with simplicity of representation, as shown in the next slide, 26. The art of simplicity. Simple symbolic representation helps learning. Without these simple symbolic representation, mathematics and science would be more difficult to facilitate to develop, to learn, to understand, and to apply. One can imagine it would be difficult to remember and understand energy equation of Einstein. It is if it's represented by a complicated equation. Once again, I will stress that the human brain is absolutely good in learning simplicities, the fundamentals, the basics, and the significances, and we should fully exploit this inherent capability rather than forcing our neural network to memorize or to learn the complex equations, that is, the complexities. Needless to say that if one is working on the complex system, then one is required to understand the complexity of the system or remember some complex equations. But most of the time, we don't need to, because we now have many storage gadgets that can assist us. Now let's look at information content and neural network learning. We all know the saying that a picture is worth more than 1,000 words. We are going to show it in the next two slides, 27 and 28. Here, looking at an old-fashioned black and white television screen. It has 500 rows, 600 columns. Each pixel has 8 brightness levels. The amount of information provided by the TV screen is 900,000 bits. A broadcaster has a pool of 10,000 vocabularies, and he's randomly selecting 1,000 words from this pool. The amount of information provided by the broadcaster is 13,000 bits. We see that the amount of information provided by an old black and white TV is indeed more than 1,000 words. For example, if one considers a 52-inch high-definition TV screen, then the information content provided by this high-definition TV would even be much higher than the black and white TV. In view of the evidence, a two-dimensional image provides more information as compared with the verbal description. The information content for image is basically very high. The image is somewhat stronger and has longer retention effect in our neural network as compared with the sequential information. For example, as we age, we sometimes tend to forget a person's name even though our brain can actually see that person's image. It is rare that we knew the name but lost the image. Let me further note that our brain has two major sensing perceptions, temporal or spatial. Temporal is sequential and spatial is pictorial. Mostly, it is the spatial information that plays somewhat significant role in our daily lives because the spatial sensing inherently contains higher information content. Let us add one more aspect of information transmission and reception as shown in the next slide. Looking at information transmission can be either temporal, spatial representation, or both. TV display is a typical example of exploiting the temporal information transmission for spatial information display. Old-fashioned movie soundtrack is an example of exploiting the spatial information for temporal information transmission. A continuous running TV program is an example of spatial and temporal information transmission. Let's take a look at one-dimension versus two-dimension calculation. On the left-hand side, you see a one-dimensional abacus, and on the right-hand side, we see a two-dimensional abacus. Note that it is in fact a logarithmic machine or an entropy calculator. Take a look at the value of pi broken into 10 arrays of numbers in slide 31. We have seen that by permuting a one-dimensional calculating machine into a two-dimensional format representation, that is the abacus, it makes the device more efficient as a calculating machine. Or a sequence of pi numbers into array of two-dimensional format. This will make it easier for us to remember the sequence of numbers as shown in slide 30 and 31 respectively. Note that one-dimensional calculator, or the 1D abacus, have been developed independently in several ancient civilizations, including Egypt, Indian, Babylonian, Chinese, and others, thousands of years ago. The Chinese converted into a two-dimensional format a couple thousand years later and called it abacus. We see that the transformation from 1D to 2D representation offers tremendous advantages and efficiencies. Notice that since it became a 2D device, the abacus had been used by the Chinese, Japanese, and many East Asian countries for thousands of years until the recent development of electronic calculators, which eventually replaced it. The other example is permuting the sequence of pi numbers into array of two-dimensional format. This would make it easier for us to remember the sequence of numbers as shown in slide 31. We see that this array of numbers can be associated to 10 telephone numbers, which is not very difficult for an average person to remember these 10 phone numbers. This also explains why, by transforming an array of numbers into a 2D array format, it changes the nature of problem from almost impossible to remember 100 digits to possible to remember. You may ask, how can one smartly remember the pi numbers? It's an excellent example to show that by taking advantage of the inherent human neural network's 2D perception capability and by adopting a smart association process, it will improve the neural network's learning ability. I call this creative learning, which we will discuss later. Again, a picture is worth more than 1,000 words. It is far more advantageous to watch a historical event on video than actually reading a history book. We are able to visualize the event we saw on the video many years ago, but we may not remember what we had read in the historical text. Let me present once more the significance of transforming a one-dimensional format into a two-dimensional representation shown in slide 32. On the left-hand side, we see the alphabet from 1 to Z. It represents a one-dimensional keyboard. On the right-hand side, we show a two-dimensional keyboard on the typewriter. As we see that without the two-dimensional keyboard representation, the typewriter would never be developed. If one looks a bit deeper, without the development of the 2D keyboard on the typewriter, then the personal computer would be very difficult or almost impossible to develop. In the next slide, we can visualize the complexity of a personal computer that we have developed. Now let's look at brain plasticity and adaptability. One of the major differences between an artificial neural network and a biological neural network is the plasticity or malleability of the brain. While the artificial neural network by name is not biological, currently artificial neural network is a way to simulate the biological neural network operation, usually with limited success. Again, the operation of an artificial neural network is still far away from the reality of the biological neural network. Scientists and engineers are still searching for new methods and algorithms to simulate the artificial neural network and to improve its performance. Nevertheless, the biological neural network is a metabolic system in which the neurons and synapses will continue to generate and to replace. Neuroscientists and MRI have shown that the biological neural network can actually improve with repeated use and proper training, as in brain plasticity. Use it or lose it. In other words, as time goes by, the more one uses his or her brain, the more our brain will be smarter and better. This is known as the neural plasticity or malleability. For people who are actually born to be, few people are actually born to be geniuses. Sometimes we mistake a better prepared youngster as a genius. For example, if Mozart was born a century later, or if he was adopted into a poor farming family, his music talent may not be developed or discovered. For the average youngster who are not born geniuses, statistically, they can improve their neural network processing ability by smart learning through innovative training or education. Since our brain is metabolic and plastic, history has shown us some of the great scientists, mathematicians, scholars, artists were not born to be geniuses at a young age. It was in later years that they evolved to become the great geniuses. One of them is the one who developed the famous energy equation. This slide shows the major differences between biological neural network and digital computer. On the left-hand side, we see that the digital computer is good for computation, while on the right-hand side, the biological neural network is good for cognitive learning. The digital computer is not a metabolic system, but the biological neural network is a metabolic system. So far, the digital computer still cannot think. Of course, the biological neural network is good for thinking. The digital computer has no emotions. The biological neural network, of course, does have emotions and other different characteristics. We stress that although computer is not a metabolic system, its components may be replaced by human intervention. So far, computers still cannot think as a biological neural network. I am still in doubt that we can make computers think someday. If the computers someday can think like a human brain, then I would recommend that we annihilate them before it is too late for us. There are several features that a biological neural network performs better than a computer. For example, in cognitive learning, the biological neural network is malleable, and the biological neural network can think and a computer still cannot. As for the neural network adaptability, we have demonstrated previously with an artificial neural network. Once again, we will look at unsupervised learning in which memory matrix converges to a feature map on the right-hand side of the next slide. In this slide, we see that on the left-hand side, the original memory matrix that is a 2D brain, has no information stored. It has a 50% error pixel. As the neural network repeated encounter with a set of patterns, in our example as a set of English alphabet A, B, C, D, then by using coherence learning algorithm, the memory matrix will eventually converge to a feature map as shown on the right-hand side of the slide. This implies that the neural network has actually learned a set of letters A, B, C, D. Notice that the neural network adaptability is another feature that current computer is not able to emulate. Next, let's talk about innovative education or training. Learning is a two-way street. There are different ways to train students. In extreme cases, we have the intelligent trainer, that is the teacher, and the smart trainee, the student, a subject we shall elaborate later. Briefly, innovative education consists of three types of learning, as given in slide 36. The art of innovative learning. We have the art of remembering, that is associative learning, the art of understanding, cognitive learning, the art of learning with thinking, and I call that creative learning. If the subject to be taught has to be memorized, the teacher can teach the students to use smart, associated memory. If the subject to be taught is more dependent on understanding the basic concepts and physical significance, then the simple, relevant cognitive illustrations should be used. For example, the subjects such as historical events, geographical locations, and languages have to be memorized. The teacher can teach the students to use smart associative memory. However, subjects such as physics, mathematics, and engineering are more dependent on understanding the basic concepts and physical significance, then relevant cognitive illustrations should be used. This slide defines what I mean by creative learning. The meaning of creative learning does not mean only one has to understand how to learn, but also why one is learning. Creative and intelligent methods have to be developed with thinking to benefit the learner. For example, one not only have to learn the methods of solving a set of differential equations, but one should also know the constraints, the limitations, as well as why we're doing it. Strictly speaking, the associative and cognitive learning are not mutually exclusive. Subjects such as literature and history also require students to understand the significance of the events as well as remember the dates and the names cited in historical periods. Notice that subjects such as mathematics, physics, and science require memorization as well as understanding. It is a matter of a degree which subject is more relevant for memorization and which subject is more suitable for students to understand the basic principles. I would like to stress again the essence of creative learning. In this information age, most of the people, including some engineers and scientists, know how the digital system operates, yet some of them may not know why we developed it. Let us look at the major differences between digital and analog system as shown in slide 39. On the left-hand side, we see that the digital form, for example, you have 0 and 1. On the right-hand side, the analog system, it has multiple levels. Digital system has lower information content, 1 bit per level. The analog system has high information content, higher bits per level, and there are other characteristics as well. Looking at this slide, one may ask, since the information nature of a digital system is lower than analog system, why does one go through the trouble to transform the analog to digital and then to transform it back to analog for the receiver? The major reason is by taking advantage of the high-speed transmission of electronic and the electromagnetic waves for digital transmission. The speed of electromagnetic wave is at the velocity of light. It can carry and transmit a lot of information at that speed. As I always told my students, one cannot get something from nothing. There's always a price to pay. And the apparent price paid must be the high speed of electronic and electromagnetic transmission. To clarify my argument, let me provide a simple example in the next slide. When we wish to transmit 26 English alphabet in digital form from A to Z, this is equivalent to a 26 distinguishable levels of amplitude. The corresponding coded digital forms are given by a total of 26 binary coded format. We know that the information content of each alphabet can be shown to equal to the log, shown to be 4.7 bits. It requires 5-digit representation, that is 5 bits per alphabet, where we assume the selection of each alphabet is equal probable. Since each unit digit represents 1 bit of information, the question is why we use a lower information content signal to transmit a higher information content signal. The apparent reason is the noise immunity in the transmission process. Otherwise, why would one pay for a longer data rate transmission? In our case, it is the 5-digit coded signal per alphabet. For example, under no noise condition, one can simply transmit any alphabet without digital conversion as he or she wishes. Because no noise interference, one can receive the same alphabet precisely, and it also does not need to decode the digital form back to alphabet. And each letter, that is the 5-digit coded form, needs 5 bits of information per letter as transmitted by binary form. This example is similar to traveling by car from one place to another. To save time, he or she opted to go on the express highway rather than driving on a slower and shorter street under the assumption that there is no traffic jam. This is precisely the reason we paid for a slower transmission per alphabet by digital form. As we see that the electromagnetic wave travel at the speed of light, a very small fraction of delay is negligible and it is insignificant. Nevertheless, the above illustration shows the essence of what I mean by creative learning. It is not just learning how a digital system operates. It's also learning why the system is actually working. Let us now take a look at innovative education. We have so far demonstrated some inherent properties of neural network operations, their abilities and limitations. As I have mentioned before, if one knows his or her limitations, it is to one's advantage. For example, our neural network is good for recognition, understand the languages, thinking. Its plasticity or malleability makes it possible for us to use it or lose it. These inherent abilities, so far even a supercomputer cannot emulate. However, in terms of processing speed, storage capacity, and some other properties, computers can perform better than a human brain. I have also shown earlier the inherent limitations ability of species. For example, it is a very serious mistake to train an Arabian horse to plow in a rice field or to swim like a water buffalo. In this context, we see that it's a mistake to force our brain to memorize the whole textbook or even remember hundreds of digits. Unless, of course, it is important for someone who's working in the field, then they have to memorize some basic things. Otherwise, we should not waste our time memorizing what the computer can easily store and retrieve for us. Many of us have had the experience of cramming for examinations in the night before and memorize a lot of formulas and facts. Then shortly after the examination, we promptly forgot most of what we memorized. In some cases, a student memorized formulas but did not understand them. During the exam, if the professor changed the wording from the textbook, student did not know how to apply them. I always told my students, the more you try to remember, the more you cannot remember. But if you have to remember some facts and formulas, it is important to understand the basic principles and the significances of these formulas using some smart associative learning process to help your memory. By the way, I used to be able to remember over 20 to 30 telephone numbers before the cell phone era. It is by no means that I was smarter than my friends. I was able to do it by using some basic associative rules, such as looking at the number sequence properties, by partitions, by asymmetric property, by addition, subtraction, or even by the rhythm of the numbers. Since the advance of the telephone technology, I have totally lost this ability. The conveniences of modern phone technology can store a great number of phone numbers, and it makes it unnecessary for me to remember them. In slide 40, let us assume a class of grade school students' aptitude distribution. The inherent neuron network can be plotted assumed as a normal distribution shown on the left-hand side of this slide. Let us further assume that student John is genetically smarter than Ken, but within the 70 percentile of the bell curve. Let student John come from a poor family, while student Ken is from a more affluent and more educated family. Let's say that Ken is better prepared than John because Ken's family helps him with his homework, pays for tutors, and pays for many enriched programs, while John has no one at home to help him, and his family cannot afford the enrichment programs. In this case, Ken is constantly learning and studying. Because of his effort and hard work and the opportunities provided for him, Ken performed better in class, as shown in the second distribution on the right-hand side of this slide. In our current educational system, teachers tend to give student Ken better opportunities and encourage him to excel, and they tend to ignore a student such as John. Usually, elementary students and high school students are not mature enough. For poor students such as John, he may never discover his potentials, that he can indeed perform just as well as Ken. Because of his impoverished circumstances, he falls further and further behind. Eventually, John inadvertently lost his interest to excel or to compete. Thus, we see that as time goes by, even though John started genetically smarter than Ken, but Ken will pull ahead of John. From knowledge-based standpoint, John will continue to fall behind and eventually lose his confidence in our knowledge-based competitive world. Statistically speaking, in terms of knowledge-based competition, most of the students like Ken will excel, and most of the students like John will perform poorly. Also, due to the plasticity of our brain, Ken eventually developed a smarter neural network as compared with John. However, in rare cases, students like John eventually may gain his confidence in later stage and become successful, but it is usually unlikely to occur. In view of this example, some parents even put extra burdens, that is, give more homework to their children. The reason is not to make up for the deficit, but to push their children over the bell curve. By overburdening the children with extra homework, we may create several negative consequences. One simple fact is that our brain needs time to rest and to relax. To push the children to well over the curve is not a smart way of training their neural networks. Remember, as you gain something, the same time you may also lose something. Allow your children to interact with others is also a part of life education. By overburdening them with extra homework that are not required in the educational system, just to push them over the curve is in a long way is not healthy for the children mentally as well as physically. Let me share a piece of my personal experience as a student in the past. I came from a disadvantaged family. In high school, I was one of the poorest students in the class. When I graduated, I ranked from the bottom number 3 out of a total of 65 students. I was a typical unguided teenage high school kid without family or parental supervision. The point I want to make is that similar to student John, I was never encouraged or motivated by all of my high school teachers. Some even discouraged me from going to college. Lack of encouragement from my teachers and lack of guidance from my parents, I completely lost confidence and showed little interest in studying. Nonetheless, I was an excellent soccer and basketball player at that time, and my dream was to continue playing these sports. I did not understand the consequences of not getting a good education in life. However, I was able to go to college on a 4-year athletic scholarship. This time, I graduated with the highest honor and received the gold medal at graduation. How did I do this? I used some of the innovative educational techniques that I described earlier. Slide 41 shows that I eventually became an optical scientist, and none of my colleagues knew that I was a soccer player and a basketball player before an arm injury diverted me into science. Now let's talk about innovative education. Learning and teaching is a two-way street. Smart teaching and smart learning are important aspects for innovative education. quality of education depends on teaching and learning effectiveness as presented in a black box diagram in slide 42. Teaching effectiveness involves teachers' responsibility. Learning effectiveness involves students' responsibility. To achieve a better quality of education, teaching effectiveness and learning effectiveness have to be properly matched. Needless to say that teaching effectiveness is basically dependent on the teacher. A good teacher has to be motivated, dedicated, and equipped with the art of innovative teaching techniques, that is, associative, cognitive, and possibly creative teaching techniques. As for learning effectiveness, the student has to be self-motivated, dedicated to learn, and use the art of learning. We need to teach grade school, junior high, and high school students differently from college and graduate students. There are different ways to learn: supervised learning and unsupervised learning. In general, there are 3 types of smart learners, although they are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Let's take a look at slide 43. In slide 43, you have the associative learner, cognitive learner, and the creative learner. An innovative education is dependent on the subject area that one is learning. For areas that need more memorization, one would use associative learning. For the subjects that need more understanding, one should use the cognitive learning as well as the creative learning techniques described earlier. Let me summarize the art of learning in the following way. The art of remembering is when one uses a smart associative learning process. One would increase somewhat the neural network storage capacity. The art of understanding is when one uses a smart cognitive learning process. One would improve the understanding of the learning. The art of creative learning is when one learns by not just knowing how things work, but also by grasping the essence or the reasons behind it, understanding how and why we're learning. Let me emphasize again, every human brain needs innovative education, learning to become a brighter brain. Geniuses were not born, but they may be cultured by innovative education, both supervised and unsupervised learning, and hard work. An Arabian horse wouldn't be a good racing horse unless she is trained for it. In conclusion, to cope with the rapid advances of science and technology, we may have to educate our students more efficiently rather than the old-fashioned traditional way. Namely, teach simplicities, basic and significant concepts, encourage unsupervised learning, and wisely use the associative, cognitive, and creative learning processes and others